Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a scientific tool you're probably already a pro at using, even if you don't know it. We're talking about the observational study. Now, it sounds simple, right? Just watching stuff. But trust me, there's a lot more to it. So, let's get into it.
I mean, think about it. Have you ever just sat in a park, or maybe an airport, a coffee shop, and just watched people? You see how they interact, how they talk to each other, what they do when they think nobody's looking. It's just a totally natural thing we all do, right? Well, guess what? That simple act, that people watching, is actually the foundation of a really powerful scientific method. So without even trying, you were basically collecting data. And today, we're going to break down exactly how researchers take that very human instinct and turn it into real hard science. Okay, so here's the plan. We'll kick things off with a basic definition. Then we'll get into the different strategies researchers have in their playbook, where they do their watching, and, this is a big one, the difference between just observing and doing a full-blown experiment. And we'll wrap up with the pros and cons of this whole approach.
All right, let's jump right into part one. So, what is an observational study, really? Let's get that core definition down.
So, you see those words right there? Without any intervention or manipulation, that is the key. This isn't like an experiment where you're changing things. Nope. Here, the researcher is just a passive observer. Their whole job is to watch, listen, and record what happens exactly as it happens. They're trying to capture reality, raw and unedited. Okay, so you might be thinking, if a scientist is just watching, how is that any different from me just chilling in a cafe? And that's a great question. The answer? It's all in the prep work. Researchers have a whole playbook to make sure what they're seeing is systematic and hopefully unbiased. The first big call they have to make is, are we going structured or unstructured? Now, unstructured is kind of like just window shopping. You write down whatever catches your eye. But for real science, most studies are structured. That means the researcher goes in armed with a checklist, and they're hunting for very specific things to record. So, a checklist sounds simple enough, but what does that actually look like in practice? How do you take something as messy and complex as human behavior and fit it onto a simple form? Let's take an example. Imagine you're a researcher studying aggression on a playground. It's chaos, right? But with a checklist, you can break it all down. Who was the aggressor? Okay, check. Who was the target? Check. How did the target react? Crying? Surprise? You note it down. Did anyone else jump in? Every single detail becomes a little box to tick. And suddenly, that chaotic mess turns into clean, usable data. But, sometimes there's just too much going on. You can't possibly watch everything at once. That's where sampling strategies come in. They help researchers focus. With event sampling, for instance, you're recording every single time a specific thing happens. Or you could do time sampling, where you only watch and record for, say, 5 minutes every half hour. And then there's individual sampling, where you just laser focus on one person or one small group for a while and ignore everyone else. Okay, so we've got the how. Now let's talk about the where. This is the next huge decision for a researcher, because when it comes to observation, believe me, the environment is absolutely everything. So you've got two main options here. You can go in the wild, which scientists call naturalistic observation. Think about watching kids on their actual school playground. The whole point is to be invisible, right? To capture that genuine, unfiltered behavior. The flip side is a contrived environment, or in the lab. This is more like a special playroom, maybe with a one-way mirror, where the researchers can control things a bit more. And last but not least, what's the researcher's role in all this? Are they just a fly on the wall, totally hidden and just watching from the sidelines? That's non-participant observation. Or do they go undercover? That's called participant observation, where the researcher actually joins the group they're studying to get the real inside scoop. And this undercover method, wow, it can lead to some mind-blowing insights. There's this famous classic study where researchers actually got themselves admitted to psychiatric hospitals. But here's the crazy part. When the staff saw them taking notes, they didn't think, oh, there's a scientist. As this quote shows, they saw the note-taking itself as just another symptom of the researcher's disorder. It just goes to show you how incredibly powerful and also how tricky this method can be.
All right, everybody, this next part is huge. I'd say it's the absolute climax of this whole explainer. We are about to get into the single most important thing you need to understand about observational studies. Ready?
I want to be crystal clear here. An observational study is not a true experiment. It just isn't. And I know it's a vital tool, but it can never be an experiment. And the reason why? Well, it gets to the very heart of how science works.
It all comes down to the researcher's role. Take a look at this. In an observational study, they're passive, right? Just watching. But in an experiment, they are an active manipulator. They are purposely changing something. And that leads to the biggest takeaway of all. An observation can show you that two things are related. It can show a relationship, but only a true experiment can prove that one thing causes the other.
So let's put it this way. Watching those kids on the playground, it might show a link, a relationship between them watching violent TV and acting aggressively. But you can't say the TV caused the aggression. You just can't. The only way you could prove that is with a real experiment where you actually control who watches what.
Okay, so now you're probably thinking, well, if you can't prove cause and effect, what's the point? Why even bother? And look, that's fair. But like any tool, it has its own special set of pros and cons. And in some situations, it's totally indispensable.
So what's the good stuff? Well, its biggest strength is getting at genuine behavior. You see what people really do, not what they tell you they do in a survey. Big difference. It also lets us study things that would be completely unethical to test in a lab. Like, you can't just inflict trauma on someone to see what happens, right? But you can observe its effects. And yeah, when you use those structured checklists we talked about, the data can be super accurate.
But there are some major downsides. We've hammered this home, but you can't prove causation. That's number one. Also, these studies can take a ton of time. And you run into some tricky ethical stuff, like, did everyone you're watching actually consent? And then there's the big one, a huge challenge, observer bias.
So what is observer bias? Simply put, it's when researchers see what they hope to see. It's not usually on purpose, it's unconscious. You might just pay a little more attention to the stuff that proves you're right and kind of ignore the stuff that suggests you're wrong. A good way to fight this is to have multiple people observing, and then they all compare notes afterwards to see if they all saw the same thing.
And really, that's the bottom line here. Observational studies give us this amazing, unfiltered window into how people really behave. They're absolutely essential for coming up with new ideas and just seeing the world as it is. But, and this is a big but, we always have to remember what they can't do and be super careful about the conclusions we draw.
So, we're back where we started. But now, you've got the scientist's playbook. The next time you're in that park, that coffee shop, what are you going to look for? Are you going to spot event sampling? Time sampling? Will you be able to tell if a researcher would be a participant or a non-participant in that scene? Now that you know the rules, what are you going to notice?